thanks for joining me. I'm Susan from So Peaceful, and today I'm going to work through a very simple English paper pieced project. It just has 7 pieces, and we'll be making a hexagon flower that can be used as an embellishment on another project. If you're new to English paper piecing, or perhaps looking for a few little tips, this would be a great place to start, so stick around. If you've purchased the hexagon flower kit from us, you'll have some fabric, a needle, some thread and a binding clip, as well as some papers. The other things that you'll find useful are a glue pen, which we also have available, and you'll need a pair of scissors to make this one as well. With the papers that I've given you, you'll have 1 hexagon and you'll have 6 petals. Now these are made of double-sided silk coated card. They're from Sue Daly, and they're all being die cut so that you'll know that each one is exactly the same. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with cutting your own papers, but you will find it easier if you've got them all exactly the same, because they'll join together much more easily. With the hexagons are measured along each side, and if we were to measure that with our little ruler here, we'll see that this one, and I'll just push that up there, this one has a side of 5/8 of an inch, and each one of those petals has 3 sides that are also 5/8 of an inch. Now it's important to just be aware of that, and I'll move this one back down here, because when we go to join them together, any one of those 3 sides could join onto the hexagon, and if we happen to stitch it on when we're not paying attention, but if we happen to stitch it on the wrong side, then our petal will be facing the wrong way. So just bring that to your attention, because it's very easily done when we're stitching them together, making sure that we have the base of the petal will join onto the hexagon. Taking your hexagon then, and our piece of fabric, the one that is the where you've only got 1 piece of it, all we need to do is place our hexagon on the piece of fabric, and if you've got something that's got a pattern on it, you can place your hexagon. You're going to get a nice piece of your fabric. But what we're looking for then is to give yourself a 1/4 inch seam allowance around your shape. So that one will be folded over there like that. So make sure you've got at least that much room. And then we're just going to trim it. And I like to cut around the shape, because it will make it nice and easy to attach. When it comes to cutting out the fabric for our petals, you'll notice that the fabric that I've given you is cut on a straight grain. So if you were to look closely, you'll see the threads of the fabric running straight up and straight across, parallel to the edges of the fabric. If you were to turn it on its edge and you've got those threads running diagonally, then you'll find that the fabric has got quite a bit more give, and so that's the way we're going to cut this petal out, and it will help to make it easier to fold the fabric over the edge there that's curved. So once again, allowing a 1/4 inch, we're going to cut round them. Now, if you'd like to make yourself a template, you can do that if you think that would help. You can use a piece of plastic, laminating plastic, whatever is easy for you. If you would like and you're feeling comfortable, you can hold 2 or 3 of those little squares in your hand, and you can cut multiples at the same time. So we'll go through then and we'll cut all of our petals so that we've got them ready to go. When we've got all our fabric cut out, the next step then is to get the fabric around the paper pieces that we've got. Now, I did mention that I like to use a glue stick, and if you've got one of those, that will make the job a lot easier. But it's always important to know how to do your thread basting, just in case you've run out of glue or you don't happen to have any and you'd like to get started. Thread basting is a great way to use up those little bits of thread that you're not likely to use in anything else. You know how you finish off a project and you've got a little bit of thread in your bobbin and your sewing machine, and you think, what am I going to do with that? This is a great way to use up those scraps. So just thread up, grab a needle and thread. It doesn't have to be anything special, because all we're going to do is tack, and that yeah, not important how that might look. So just with my finger, I'm going to just press over the first couple of edges there to get started. When we're thread basting, we're just going to be stitching through the fabric that's on the corners. So we're folding it over to bring those corners across, and we're just going to be stitching through the fabric. So not through the paper at all, but just in the corner. And so we'll start with a stitch in the corner. I'll grab the needle, slipping away. And we'll go over that one, so we'll hold those pieces together. So keeping your paper shape in the middle there as best as you can, we'll just bring our thread across to the next corner. Once again, not going through the paper, just going through the corner. And we'll do the same little tacking stitch. So we've made our corner there. Now, one of the reasons that I prefer to use the glue is because when we tack, and we're only tacking the corners and not going through the paper, it works quite well if you've only got little shapes, little sides, like this one. As we've said, it's a 5/8 of an inch. And so just tacking the corners will hold that down quite nicely. If we get a shape that's got quite a bit bigger size, so 1 inch or 1.5 inches, say twice the size, 2 or 3 times the length, having the stitches just in the corners won't hold the fabric down on the sides. It's too much movement going on there when the sides are bigger. When you've got that problem happening, only way to stop that is to stitch through the paper. So you're stitching through the paper to hold it all down. Once you start stitching through the paper, your papers are not going to last as long because they've got holes in them, obviously, but also you'll have tacking on the back. Once you've got tacking on the back, you're going to have to take time later on to take those tacking stitches out. So that's why I prefer to use the glue stick, because at the end of the day it's a much easier process. So we've just gone round then and tacked all those corners down, and that was our thread basting method, like I said, just with scissors, just with a random thread, something that will it's not important what colour it is, because you're never going to see that unless it's you know, a really thin fabric and you've got a bright red thread underneath it. But it will be on the back because we haven't stitched through the papers. So we're going to move along then and use our glue pen to do the petals. The Soline glue pen is something that we have in stock, and it's water-soluble fabric glue. It's designed for using with your fabric and your papers. It's got a nice little head on it. We know that it's going to work well because that's what it's been designed for. When we use the glue, we're not going to put our glue right on the edge of the paper, because after we fold the fabric over it, we're going to be stitching really close to that edge, and it will be easier to stitch if we haven't got glue in there. We'll try and get this glue, and it's much easier when you've got a nice small head on it. We'll try and get the glue just inside the line there, so that when we fold the fabric over, we don't get the glue on our fingers. Not that it's going to hurt you, but just stops you getting sticky fingers. So when you buy one of these glue pens, it comes with glue in it, and it also comes with a refill tube, so that you know, in future all you need to do is just replace the refills. So I'm just going to start by putting a little bit of glue in the middle of the shape there and putting him down in the center of my piece of fabric. And I'm going to start on this right hand side. Now, whether you're right-handed or left-handed won't make any difference, but the important thing is to glue, start on one side and to glue in the same direction, going round in the same direction. So if you're left-handed, you might start on the left side and glue around. And just important to remember to keep gluing in the same direction. So just starting with a little bit of glue then on the side, and with my finger I'll just push that over and fold it down. Now, don't use a lot of glue. If you keep in mind, the more glue that you put on, the harder it will be to get the papers out in the end. So less is better. Pop a little bit on the fabric there and go round again. And because we want this a nice curved shape, we don't want to get any pleats in here. We're just looking to gather as we go round, and you might need a little bit of extra glue if it's not sticking, but the important thing here is to get a nice gathered shape. And what we're looking for is nice sharp corners around our shapes, and when we turn it over we should be able to see a nice curved edge. If you're not happy with any of your curves or your points. When you've used the glue, it's easy enough to pick up the piece because it hasn't quite dried yet. It does dry quickly, but you'll have a bit of extra time just to move things around a bit. So making sure that you're happy then with them, and we'll go through then and we'll glue the rest of our petals. So just remembering, just start, pop a bit of glue on the back, start on the side, not too much glue. Avoid the edge of the paper and aiming for a nice gathered edge around that curve. No sharp points on it. The sharp points belong on the corners, but not on the curved edge. Take time just to check them out. Make sure you're happy with each piece, and then go on and finish all 6 of your petals. Once you're happy, then we've got everything either glue basted or thread basted, and you're happy with your curves and your points on your corners, it's time then to start joining the pieces together. Now with the kit, I've given you a needle, and it could be one of two. If it's a milliner's needle, it's a size 11 milliner's needle, and I've put these two side by side so that you can see the difference. The other one that you might have is a size 10 applique needle. With the milliner's needle, the milliner's needle is long and it's fine. Milliner's needle is long and straight. You might have heard it called a straw needle, but it's straight up and down. One of the problems with a milliner's needle when we're doing English paper piecing is that it will bend, and you might be able to see that that one is bent. The applique needle, being a size 10, is a little bit thicker, only a little bit thicker, but it's still a great needle. If you're having problems with your fingers, as mine tend to play up a little bit, now they're a little bit older, they don't do the things that they once used to do. I do find the milliner's needle is a lot easier to hold, particularly when I'm stitching my pieces for English paper piecing. However, if you don't like a bent needle, then the size 10 applique needle is the one that you need. We have both available in packets in our store. The thread that I've given you is an 80 weight thread, and you've got a little sample there on a floss card, and it comes from this one, which is a Wonderfill or Deco Bob thread. It's an 80 weight polyester thread. It's been what they call cottonized, which just means it's had the stretch taken out of it. You'll find it's a very fine thread, and the idea of using that for our English paper piecing is that it will blend in to the fabric threads and be less visible, which is probably what we're really looking for. If you compare it to your sewing machine thread, it's probably half the thickness. So we'll thread up our needle and thread then. Just a single strand of thread. If you measure it out from your fingertip to your elbow, that will be long enough piece, and we'll put a knot in the bottom. The other thing that I've given you is a binding clip. Now, I've given you this because it is really handy for holding your pieces together. Once again, you know, you can use your fingers and you're gripping them to make sure they don't move. But if you use a little binding clip, it takes a lot of pressure off your fingers. The other reason I like this, if we come back to remember that we need to make sure our petals are facing away from the hexagon, when I pick up my first two pieces, my petal and my hexagon, what I'm going to do is put my binding clip, when I've got the points lined up at either side, I'll put my binding clip on the bottom where that curve is, so that I remember that that's the outside edge, and I won't make the mistake of joining any of these other sides together. So the side that's opposite to my clip are the edges that I'm going to be joining. Okay, so with my needle and thread then, I'm going to pop my needle up through the corner, and I'll pull that through so that my knot is hidden underneath the fold of the fabric. And what we're doing is called a whip stitch, and if I just hold it on the side there, you should be able to see, hopefully, what I'm doing. If you think about the edge of your fabric and where your paper is, I know sometimes it's hard to imagine, but you have got a little gap there between the edge and your paper where your needle is going to fit through, and that's where we're going to be stitching. It's roughly 2 stitches or 2 threads in from the outside edge. So right on this corner then where we're beginning, I'm going to just I'll come through the loop there that I've got. So I've made an extra knot. Get into the habit of just putting an extra knot on each of your corners. So if it comes undone at all, then you're not going to, have a whole multitude of pieces coming undone. It will stop when it gets to the knot. So as I said, we're just doing what's called a whip stitch. So we're going over and then coming through just in the gap between the edge of your fabric and your paper. If you keep your needle nice and straight, it's just a straight stitch, and they're probably 1/8 of an inch apart. And pull your thread tight as you bring it through. If you feel that you're going to be going through the paper, just lift your needle up a little bit higher, but we don't want it to be too close to the edge that our stitches are hanging off the edge. Now, please don't stress if you do end up going through the paper and nothing serious will happen. It will just make it a little bit more difficult to get them out. At the end, you'll have to take a little bit of extra care, and just means that they may not last as long. I mean, ideally, you'll be able to make 4 or 5 or even 6 flowers out of these same papers before they really become misshapen and ruined. But if you look after them, you'll be able to use them several times. So stitching straight through. If you keep your stitches nice and straight, they will be far less visible than any stitch that's on a diagonal. When you get to the end, do an extra knot, but you don't need to cut your thread off. What you do then is take your binding clip off and open it up. What you're looking for is to make sure that you can't see the daylight through the stitches, and that would be if you haven't pulled your thread tight enough as you've come through, you might be able to see the daylight, or if you've got a too big a space in between them. If you find yourself in that situation, you might just need to go back and just fill in those gaps. Now's a good time to do that. Otherwise, if you're happy, just grab your next petal, put it the base of the petal to the edge of your hexagon, lining up those points. And once again, I'll put my binding clip on there so I know that that's the bottom. I'm going to, when I put my needle through those 2 points, I'm going to make it stitch through the loop again so that I can make a knot, and I'll continue on in the same way, just stitching across the top, not going through the paper, nice straight stitches, and pulling the thread just tight, but not so tight that I'm going to snap the thread, but just pulling it tight with each stitch that I make through there. And then when I get to the end of that one, again, I'll check it, make sure that I'm happy that I haven't got any gaps in there. And if all's looking good, then I'll continue to add on the next petal. Keep working around that then until the knot in the side. Keep working around that then, adding on all of your 6 petals, making sure they're all facing the right way. And then when we've got that, we'll come back and we'll join the sides together. Once you've got all 6 of your petals stitched on and you've made a knot to finish off that last one, you'll just need to snip your thread there. By the time you've done those 6, you should be starting to really get a good feel for that gap where your needle has gone through, just above your paper. So you've made sure then that your stitches, you get a good bite of your fabric, but you're just in between the edge of your fabric and your paper. So we don't want to be hanging off the edge, but we need to be far enough in that we're not hanging off the edge and we're not going through the paper. Like I said, please don't stress. It's a bit of a learning curve, but I do like using the card because it will help you to feel that gap really well. So once we've got our 6 petals on and we're happy that we've filled in any gaps that we need, so we can't see the daylight through them and they're hanging on nice and tightly, we're going to be stitching up the sides. Now you'll notice, and I can see quite clearly with this one, there is a gap between the top of that point and this one down here. So we're not going to stress about that because there's quite a bit of movement in those pieces. So if I just give this one a little bit of a nudge, I can bring this edge up so it meets with that point there. Same with all of them, really. There's enough movement in there that you can bring your points together. So when we join our petals together, we want them to be linking at those points there at the edge of the petals, not down like this. So we'll just think about that as we go around. And so what you'll notice then is that your hexagon will bend in the middle, and don't be afraid to bend it because that's what we're going to be doing with our next step. So starting with, doesn't matter where we start because they're all the same, but we're going to start by bringing together then, folding our hexagon in half and bringing together 2 of the petals, and we're going to join them up starting at the outside edge, and we'll pop our binding clip on the bottom underneath them to hold them together, and with our needle and thread then we'll pop a knot in the bottom. And in exactly the same way as we did when we joined our petals on, we're going to put a needle and thread up through the fold on one side, and I like to start just a little tiny bit in so that I can then come back to the end. To put my knot in the top there. And don't be afraid to do that twice, particularly in the areas where you think there might be, you know, risk that it could come undone. So using that same whip stitch then that we did before, keeping the stitches nice and straight, pulling them tight as you go through, stitching about 2 threads in from the top, but trying to avoid going through the paper. I keep saying it, but please don't stress, because it's just a process, and the more that you do it, the easier it will become. We also stock fusible hexagons or fusible paper pieces that come from Hugs and Kisses, and I do love them and would always use them if I'm using Liberty fabric to do English paper piecing, because the Liberty Lawn is quite fine fabric, and because it's a fine fabric, when you put it over the paper, over these papers, you find that it doesn't give you that nice gap that your normal cotton quilting fabric will give you, and it's much harder to find that gap. So if I use the fusible hexagons, it's not quite as vital that I stitch in that same place. So I do love them, but I think it's always good, and I would recommend somebody starting out, start off with the card, because it's much easier to find that gap to stitch through that place where you're not hanging off the edge, but you're just far enough in. Once you get down to the bottom of those sides, then once again popping a little knot in that section, pull your thread tight, take your clip off, and we're going to run our thread along the inside of that hexagon. So with your needle and thread, just passing it underneath your hexagon, your fold of your fabric there. Oops, a bit twisted. Making sure I don't lose my needle and thread. So I've just passed it underneath there, so from one side to the other side. So I've stitched down here, passed my thread under through there, and then I'm going to fold my hexagon in the other direction, and I'm going to stitch up the side of this next one. So once again, I'll pop my clip on there to hold it for me so I don't put too much pressure on my fingers, and a knot at the bottom of this piece. If you don't have your thread too long, why we sort of suggest that you just use a piece the length from your fingertip to your elbow, is because if you have it too long, runs the risk of getting caught around your pieces, and just will knot up. The reason we use the polyester thread, I've just lost my needle there, but the reason why we use the polyester thread too also is because we're running over the top of the papers, a cotton thread is more likely to shred in the process, going over backwards and forwards over the paper, and so the polyester thread is much stronger. Being nice fine thread, it should be relatively easy to thread the needle, but if you do have trouble, I find clipping the thread on an angle will help. The other thing to bear in mind with your needles is that they do have a right and a wrong side. If you have a look at the way needles are made, you'll see that the hole is pierced from one side, and that's always going to be the side that will be easier to thread. You know, when I say right and a wrong side, I mean they're not labelled in that way, but one side is easier to thread than the other. So, you know, if you can't get it one way, turn your needle around and try it on the other side. And then, of course, you know, we have any number of needle threaders or available that will help to make the job easier too. But I do find it much easier, even though it's such a fine needle. I find it a lot easier to thread sometimes than a normal needle with my normal sewing machine thread. So please don't you know, look at the size of the needle and cringe. So knot at the end then, and when we open it up, once again just looking to make sure that we've, you know, can't see the daylight, we're happy with our stitches, we've got those where those petals join, we're happy with those. So we've managed to stitch two seams together. We've only got to do that a couple more times and we'll have the whole flower joined together. Don't take the hexagon out until you've got everything, all the surrounding seams all joined together, but you'll have to cut your thread off there and rejoin it to another outside edge to start joining the next pair together. I'll need to rethread, so I'll stop it there and continue to stitch those pieces together, and then I'll come back shortly. When you've got it finished, you've stitched all your sides together, then I wouldn't do anything more with it until I'm ready to stitch it onto something else, because once you take the papers out, it will start to lose those nice curved edges that you've got, and it could be difficult getting them back again. However, when you're ready to use it, whether you're going to stitch it onto a zipper pouch or a coaster or mug rug, anything that you like, when you're ready to do that, give it a good press with a steam iron. The glue, as I mentioned earlier, is water soluble, so the steam will start to dissolve it. And I did start to do that, and you'll see how this one's lifted already. As a result of that, just had a little bit of water left in the iron from another project. I thought it was emptied, but it wasn't. So when we're ready to use it, then pressed with a steam iron, and then we can just take our papers out. The one in the middle is going to be quite easy because I just thread basted that one, and so I'll just put my finger in underneath and pull it out. These other ones that were glue basted, as I said, the glue water soluble, so the steam will start to dissolve it and certainly starts to shift it. So I just need to get my fingers in underneath that, and if I haven't stitched through the papers, they just pop out quite easily. If I have stitched through the papers, they'll be a little bit more stubborn because obviously they've got stitches through the papers. and I just need to be a little bit more gentle so that I don't rip the papers out and rip my stitches at the same time. But you should be able to pull them out without too much trouble. Then it's simply a case of deciding how you'd like to stitch it on, whether it's with your sewing machine or a blanket stitch or a blind applique stitch. I'll be making another video shortly with another project, and I'm going to use this as an embellishment. But you could make, as I said, make multiples using the same fabric or different fabric, whatever you would like. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you'd like any additional supplies, you can find those on our website, or send me a message if you have any questions. Otherwise, I would love to see your hexagon flowers, so please send me a picture. Cheers. Bye.